Our next question deals with federal policy as related to agriculture and subsidies. Right now, agriculture is the only product the U.S. exports more than it imports. How do we maintain this ratio going forward in a district where agriculture is so vital to the economy? We'll begin with Mr. Larry Bill.
As you stated during the question, agriculture is critical to United States exports, and it's also critical to our trade balance, and I understand that. However, if you take a look at the Department of Agriculture, there are so many subsidy programs now that on the campaign trail, even Roy Blunt was told, you need to cut these back. You've got to understand my point of view. 40 cents of every dollar that is spent by the federal government is borrowed. And if we don't borrow it, we print it. And if we print it, the dollar has no value. So these are the things that I'll be working at whenever I analyze the programs. As I understand the ACRE program, and there's another one called the MAL program, which involves loans based on crops. Those programs are confusing. Nobody understands them. I would advocate to eliminate them. At one time, we had a chance to eliminate direct subsidies, but the Republican Congress chose to leave those direct subsidies in because they weren't necessary. And the Republican Congress decided to leave those direct subsidies in because they wanted to have a baseline in case they would ever need them again. Right now, the subsidies are very little, actually, to the producers because the crop prices now are very good, and I really appreciate that. So that would be my opinion on crop subsidization. Thank you.
Mr. Tommy Sowers.
When it comes to agricultural subsidies, agriculture is the vital economy for our area, and I want to protect agricultural subsidies for family farmers, big and small. And to me, it's less about subsidies and much more about security. I was a Ranger in a Green Beret, and I look at our increasing dependence on foreign oil as nothing compared to an increasing dependence on foreign food would cause. Food is our security, and the American farmer can compete, given a level playing field. But unfortunately, with the current trade deals that have been put in place, they don't have that level playing field. One thing that's vitally important for me and for the farmers that I've spoken with is they want their kids to stay here and work. So we've also got to look at how can we incentivize not just the production of raw materials here to get shipped off to China to get manufactured into finished goods, but how can we subsidize the other levels of production further up the value chain? In Congress, I will seek a position on the Agricultural Committee. Congresswoman Emerson used to have a position on the Agricultural Committee, but she gave that up for a position on the Appropriations Committee. I think with the diversity of the agriculture that we have in this district deserves an agricultural leader. Thank you.
Ms. Joanne Emerson.
Thank you. I'm very happy to serve on the Agricultural Appropriations Subcommittee and to have worked very hard to protect the safety net of our producers here in Missouri because ag is our #1 industry. And the fact of the matter is that today our farmers are under threat, not only from foreign competitors, but really from folks who live in the metro areas who don't understand that food doesn't come from the grocery, it comes from the farm. And I will also say that our farmers are really competing against countries, whether it's the European Union or South America, where their farmers are subsidized a great deal more than we are. And that makes it very important to at least have a safety net. Larry is correct, because prices are higher. The fact is that there'll only be about $12 billion worth of subsidies this year. That pales in comparison to our competition. And because our farmers produce the safest, most abundant food anywhere in the world, we are actually producing food for each farmer for 160 people and his or her family. And so it's absolutely vital. It's a $12 billion industry here in Missouri. 245,000 people work in it. And I will point out that the ag budget, only 10% of the agriculture budget is actually dealing with commodity programs.
Mr. Rick Van Dieven.
Agriculture is one area where we have an absolute competitive advantage over every other country in the world. But I have a big problem with this country's agriculture policy. This district is near the top of the heap in the amount of farm subsidies it's received. Yet we're one of the poorest districts in the nation. The Boot Hill region receives the lion's share in the amount of farm subsidies, and they're the poorest of the poor. When I travel through the Boot Hill, I see rows of shacks and acres of subsidized cotton and a big old plantation house right in the middle of it all. It would be incorrect for me to pigeonhole all farmers into this category because subsidies are grossly unfair to farmers. Subsidies artificially increase land prices and rent. They prevent small operations from expanding, and they prevent new participants in the agriculture industry. Who is benefiting from these farm subsidies? It's a few big agriculture corporations and the politicians that can count on their support. 10% of farmers receive 81% of farm subsidies. There's a farmer in Cape Girardeau that has received $2.9 million in farm subsidies since 2005. This is not about...
Our next question deals with the subject of the Environmental Protection Agency. Economic development in southeast Missouri depends partly on the ability of landowners to build buildings, change landscapes, drain ponds, cut trees, and otherwise manipulate land to suit the developer's needs. The EPA has set up standards for soil tests, animal studies, material disposal, and water tests that delay, if not eliminate, necessary improvements for economic development. If elected, would you support scaling back these regulations to help the economy, or would you leave them like they are? If so, why? Up first, Rick Van Dieven.
Land, water, and air quality have continuously improved over the course of my lifetime. And this is thanks to the free market and the efforts of environmentalists and scientists, much more so than regulatory agencies like the EPA or legislators in Congress. I am fundamentally opposed to government regulation. Individuals, like farmers, should be assumed to be innocent until proven guilty of causing unreasonable pollution. Corporations like ConAg and ADM, which by their very nature have legal limited liability, should continue to be subject to regulatory schemes enforced by the EPA. There is no cut and dry answer to the environmental issue. Libertarians believe that one legitimate function of the government is the prohibition of trespass, and I view pollution as being trespass. It is the role of scientists to determine what constitutes unreasonable pollution. Legislators should examine the scientific data and wisely construct laws that protect individuals from unreasonable pollution. Thank you.
Ms. Ann Emerson.
Well, I think the question deals in the broad sense with private property rights, but I think let's just talk about the regs part. I'm going to focus on the regs part. First of all, just the way the process works. The Environmental Protection Agency gets involved, and if it's not just the EPA, then it's the DNR here in Missouri working together. And anytime somebody wants to develop land, you have to do environmental impact statements or an environmental assessment. It can take years. And quite frankly, half the time I believe that the folks at EPA think that fish are more important than people and critters are more important than people, so the regulators are not friendly with regard to economic development. As a matter of fact, the Environmental Protection Agency not only wants to require dairy farmers right now to, at least those who store 1,320 gallons of milk or more, to provide an oil spill and response plan just like BP Oil or ExxonMobil. I mean, come on, this is absolutely ridiculous. The Environmental Protection Agency is now saying woody biomass is going to be counted like coal for purposes of the Clean Air Act. And I could go on and on and on, but let me just say that the EPA is not a friend. It's an economic crisis in itself.
Mr. Larry Bill.
I also believe that the EPA is overreaching. They changed their standards. I was at a meeting about economic development, and we had two representatives. One was a staffer for a congressman. It was not Mrs. Emerson's. The other was an EPA representative, and the EPA was trying to explain what we're going to do with the new ozone regulations, and all the people around there said, you know, you're going to slam our factories. You know, we're not going to be able to make this. You know, you're going to run jobs off. They were yelling at the wrong person. Control of the EPA is based on funding from Congress. Here was this poor bureaucrat sitting there going, I'm doing exactly what Congress is telling me to do. They should have directed their attention and their venom towards that congressional staffer. And eventually that congressman did in fact question the ozone standards, but boy, it took a whole lot of convincing to say, hey EPA, slow down, take it easy, we're in the middle of a recession. All you're doing is providing just one more stumbling block for us to create jobs with. And that's the person we need to go after, the one that's in Congress that's allowing this to be funded, the one that's in Congress that's providing the guidelines for the EPA. And the EPA has been a big organization and has been with us through Republican and Democrat majorities for the last 30 years. Thank you.
Mr. Tommy Sowers.
This is an area that, in principle, I agree with Larry. Is when I taught the Constitution at West Point, it's very clear when you read that document that they wanted Congress to be strong. And there's not a single line in the Constitution that says one party will check the other party. But there's a lot of lines that say Congress should check the executive. So there are many tools out there, most specifically having clear and precise laws. Having members of Congress that aren't focused on re-election, that are really focused on creating the best policies out there. That includes the EPA. There's too many regulations there, but they only have those regulations because of abstract laws that give them that room to create those abstract or very specific regulations. With me, you're going to have somebody that knows the Constitution, that taught the Constitution, and is going up there to check the executive. Thank you.
Our next question deals with energy as related to agriculture. The Environmental Protection Agency has implemented very strict standards on the number of parts per million of sulfur in diesel fuel. These standards have affected the price of diesel fuel significantly. Considering the large amount of diesel fuel necessary to successfully run a Boot Heel farm, these standards affect both profitability and viability. As a U.S. Congressperson, what would you do to affect these standards, and what effect do you believe your actions would have on Southeast Missouri farm operations? We'll begin with Mr. Larry Bill.
Well, I don't think we need to raise the standards on the exhaust. I think we're in an economic difficult time right now, and if we could in any way, you know, stop the impact of this rise, be critical for us. The other part that I'm very interested in is energy independence. And I think that the fact that we are funding our enemies with the fuel that we buy is a disgrace, and that we should work towards it to be energy independent and to drill here in the United States. I would not want to go ahead and lower the standards anymore, because right now we've got the cleanest air that we've got in the world. And I think it's important that we just go ahead and stick with the current standards and not raise them.